This episode of Racing Greats features a man who has maintained a seat at the top table of racing's elite for decades. But more than that, he has been a pioneer amongst his contemporaries. Irish trainer Dermot Weld has a long and distinguished list of big race wins at home and abroad, but none perhaps as memorable and magical as Vintage Crop's historic Melbourne Cup heroics back in 1993. Dermot Weld, thank you so much for having Steve and I here to visit, chat, reflect, reminisce about what is now, I think, 5 decades, training at the top level, well over 4,000 winners, 4,300 plus, I believe. Leading trainer, numerically, 18 times. So many great horses to look back on. But I'd like to take you back to the start. I think you were riding as well as training to begin with. I mean, where did it all begin? Where did you believe that your life would take you back in the early 70s?
I was very fortunate. I had a wonderful mother and father. And my father was a superb trainer. And I learned an awful lot from him. And of course I started riding in races at 15. And my second ride I won the feature amateur handicap in Galway on a horse called Ticonderoga. And it all set off from him.
Yeah. Just think that one of the things which, from a very early stage, and talking to you outside, I can see where it's come from, you've got a real interest in international racing, not just parochial. And where did that, with that interest, where did that come from?
That interest started very young because when I decided I want to become a veterinarian, I realised racing in Ireland in general, was a poor country. It was the 60s. And to put myself through college, I had to earn money. My mother and father helped, but I had to earn money. So some people went during the summer holidays to work on construction in New York. I went to ride racehorses. And it was as a 17-year-old, I watched my first Belmont Stakes. I was on the backstretch.
Wow.
And so every summer I used to go to ride for different trainers and work as a student vet. For them, and that's how the whole interest started off. I was really Belmont Park in Saratoga, the aqueduct, but especially in Belmont. Oh. And of course, the Belmont Stakes is the biggest day on the east coast of America. It still is, and that's where I saw my first Belmont.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
The Belmont Stakes will come up later in this chat, because what we're going to do now is to reflect on the various decades of success. I mean, going back to the 70s in particular, I mean, there are a number of very good horses, a number of very good two-year-olds, but I thought one that I'd like to mention was Sakira, who had quite an outstanding two-year-old season. I mean, what do you recall?
I vividly recall Sakira because I was at Saratoga Sales, and I had just begun to train for Robert Sangster, but his main operation was obviously with Vincent O'Brien. And I asked Robert if I could buy a filly for him. And he said I could, but not spend very much money. And I asked him how much could I spend? And he said 40, maximum $50,000. And I showed him the pedigree of a filly I thought might suit. And I stand corrected, I think I bought her for, I think it was $35,000. And she was by Roberto out of Irule, if I remember rightly. Yeah. I thought it was a nice pedigree. I picked her up because I just thought that she mightn't just appeal to American breeders. Roberto was ideal for Europe. And she went on, she turned to be a brilliant filly for me. And she was just an outstanding two-year-old. She won the Cheveley Park. And of course she won the Royal Ascot as well. And then Robert sold her to Juddmonte, and she became one of these fabulous foundation mares of Juddmonte, with of course direct descendants. Now we have Banks Hill, Intercontinental, Dan Silly, all these wonderful racehorses of Juddmonte descended from Sakira. And as I said, she was the only. I bought a colt and a filly at that sale. I bought a horse called Diamonds or Trumps that won the Irish National Stakes for me. And I bought Sakira.
Some other very good two-year-olds in that spell. I mean, when you look back on the early horses that helped you make your name in the sport, what other ones would you consider vital to that establishing
I
reputation?
I think Steelheart has to be up there. He was a very good 2-year-old. He won the Gimcrack for me. He won the Middle Park.
Yeah.
And he was a lovely horse to train. He was by Habitat. And he was just a real good sprinter. There was another nice horse, Hot Spark. He was a very, very fast horse as well. He won the Flying Childers.
Yeah.
Moving into the 80s, and I'm going to let Steve run this particular segment of the show. There's a couple of horses here that you absolutely
A couple of my all-time favourites, both fillies,
Sure.
and I'm sure you're not going to argue with me, they were very good. But so 81 and Blue Wind, I was at Epsom that day, and to say she won the Oaks would be a bit unfair. She's absolutely bolted up and beat a good field. Tell us about Blue Wind, please.
Blue Wind was very, very special. She was a big filly. She really came into her own. She was beaten a short head in the Irish 1,000 guineas, and she went to Epsom, and she absolutely won as she liked. And she beat a high-class renewal of the race with Madame Gay, I think, was second,
Yeah.
and she went on to win the Prix de Diane.
Yeah.
Always remember the day, because the plan was for Leicester to have her pretty handy. You know, she had a good draw, get a nice position. We all agreed that'd be it. And very often I like to watch races on my own. And I couldn't believe it. She was last. And you'll find, if you watch the recording, she was last for right up the top of the hill. Leicester's just sitting there. And my first reaction was, has something happened to her saddle, or there was some reason why? Because even Leicester had kind of said he was going to sit prominent. And he's sitting last. And of course, the rest is history. They'd gone very quick. Leicester takes his time. Rides the totally opposite to what he kind of we'd planned.
Did he tell you why?
They just went too fast.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
That's the only time he did that, personally. You said when the second went on to win the French Oaks, which she did. She was also second to Shergar in the King George. So it was not an ordinary horse. She was beating 7 lengths with
True
10
indeed.
lengths back to the third. It was it looked like a national hunt race at the finish.
Yeah, and then she came out 3 weeks later,
Yeah.
Blue Wind, and she won the Irish Oaks for me. And a lovely ride from Wally Swinburne.
Yeah, yeah. So she was pretty good. The next one we're going to go on to, personal favourite. I don't know where you'd rank her, but I thought Committed was, one, a wonderful filly, and two, part of a fabulous era of sprinting. But again, if you wouldn't mind talking about
Oh,
that.
I think people talk about sprinters. That was the vintage
Definitely.
of my training career. They were the best sprinters that I would say. I know every you should not compare, and I tend not to compare horses or generations, but they were vintage sprinters. And Committed was the fastest filly I ever trained, or ever probably likely to train. And she just got better with age. She won the Prix de l'Abeille, the Longchamp, 2 years running for me, as a 4-year-old and as a 5-year-old.
Yep.
She was brilliant throughout her career. Her Royal Ascot wins, when she won at York, she was a very, very talented sprinter.
And just to give an idea, people, some of the horses who were around that time were Habibti, who was a brilliant sprinter, Never So Bold,
Yes.
I think Robert Armstrong trained.
Yes.
The classic, not the classic second, but a very, very good horse called Chief Singer.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the great July Cups, two of the great July Cups you ran in. And yeah, the York race you mentioned, that was the first time she was dropped back to 5 furlongs, and you wouldn't have known it, would you?
No, you wouldn't, but I always thought 6 was her optimum distance. But, as I said, she wins 2 Prix de l'Abeilles over 5.
Yeah.
5 to 6, she was just very, very brilliant filly.
Yeah.
And taking on those brilliant sprint colts.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, Dermot, see, by this stage you've already won a lot of big races. Did you have, or have you had, ambitions of races you wanted to win at this point? Or is it simply a case of, I train good horses and I'll find the right races wherever they may be?
I think it was a combination of both. I think it was you have the horse and then you look for the race for them. That would be the way. But equally, in those days, it was always in my mind that competition was so keen in Ireland because there was 2 wonderful trainers in my early days I had to train against. There's always been good trainers in Ireland, and my God, they're equally good now. But I had Vincent O'Brien and Paddy Prendergast. You must remember Mr. Prendergast was 3 times champion trainer of England, 3 years running, training from Ireland. So I had to compete at a very young age against these men. And I felt, having travelled the world myself as a young veterinarian, that there was more opportunities outside of Ireland with major Group 1 races that could be won. And hence the thoughts of Australia and America were the two major places at that time to enter my mind. When I have the right horse, these are the races I want to win.
Well, there were lots of very good horses in the 80s, but we move into the 90s and that becomes a theme. And we might save the best for last in that one.
Okay.
But I'll start you off in the 90s with Go and Go. And how Go and Go ended up running.
Well, this is it. You need luck in life as well. And Go and Go was a good 2-year-old. He won my favourite 2-year-old maiden in Galway, which it always takes a good horse to win. And he won his stakes race after that. And I saw a race, a grade 1 on the turf in Laurel Park, Maryland. And I figured out how we could get him there and without costing too much. And it seemed, I thought at that time, Americans tended to steer very much away from the turf, and dirt races was so prevalent and the dominant. I think grass racing is accepted far more nowadays in America than it used to be. It is. But I just thought, here's an opportunity. Here's a grade 1 on the turf, going a mile, which was ideal distance for him. So that was it, decision made. And landed at Laurel Park. I went to the races. And the night before, of course, it absolutely spilled rain. And the race was taken off the turf and run on the dirt. And of course, the executive wanted to know, did I still want to run the horse? And I said, I've brought him a long way, so we better run him. And we ran him, and of course, he won the Laurel Futurity. And then what we did, he was one of the first horses to fly DHL from Washington, D.C. down to Miami, because the Breeders' Cup was run in Miami that year. And he ran, obviously there was only the dirt mile, there wasn't turf miles. And he ran 4th in that and ran an excellent race. So we'd seen him win on the dirt at grade 1 level, and we'd seen him run 4th in the Breeders' Cup dirt mile for 2-year-olds. And that straight away gave me the idea that we should have a look at the Kentucky Derby for him for next year. And that was the initial plan over the winter. But I found it very hard to get the quarantine that I wanted for Kentucky. And one thing or another, we had a damp spring in Ireland. I did get to run him, and he won at Phoenix Park over 7 furlongs or a mile. But I had a lot of problems to get to Kentucky to do the quarantine. I was trying to get them to do the quarantine in New York and then to van him from there to Kentucky, but didn't get a lot of cooperation because they're different people own different racetracks. And to cut a long story short, I settled on the one race I wanted to win was the Belmont. And I thought I had the horse. And so we decided on the Belmont. And Michael Kinane gave him a brilliant ride. And of course, we beat the winner of the Kentucky Derby by 7 lengths. He ran the 7th fastest time for a Belmont Stakes. And I was very, very proud to Go and Go.
Oh, fantastic.
But I must say, he was a tough horse, very genuine. He was ideal horse for either surface. And I had one other horse later on that handled both surfaces equally well. And but Go and Go had everything a horse needs to win on the dirt in America, and very adaptable, and great courage.
And you spoke of your childhood or your teen years and the time that you spent at Belmont, and you spoke about the big occasion that is the Belmont Stakes. So what was that day, that moment like?
In those days, there was about 120,000 people at the Belmont that year, and it was just a very special occasion. It was one of those life-fulfilling moments that I've been fortunate to enjoy.
Were the Americans pleased for you? Were you?
They were. I've always got a great reception in America. I've always been very fortunate in America. America's been very good to me, and I hope I've brought some very good horses to win there.
Yeah, yeah.
Also in the 90s, there was a very good colt called Zagreb, who proved himself outstanding on occasions.
He was. He wasn't the most consistent horse. He was a nervous horse. He took very careful training, but when he was good, he was brilliant. And he was bi-theatrical, a horse that was a very good horse I trained for Bert and Diana Firestone. And in fact, Leicester rode him in the Epsom Derby. He was a good Group 1 horse here, and he went on, of course, to be a very good Grade 1 horse in America, an excellent sire, always a bit temperamental, and Zagreb was no different. And he just wasn't the most consistent horse, but when he was good, he was very good. And we brought him on for the Irish Derby. It had always been my plan for him. But Michael Kinnan rode him at Leopardstown in his prep for the Irish Derby, and he was second. He was beaten. And Michael was very disappointed with him. And he was offered the ride on the favourite in the race. And I let him off to ride the favourite. And Pat Shanahan, my number 2 rider, and very, very capable rider, rode Zagreb to win the Irish Derby by 6 lengths.
Did you have any indication before? You said he was in and out. Did you go there hopeful or
I went there hopeful,
Right.
hopeful, but I did know on his day he was very, very talented.
Yeah.
Also in that period, I mean, we could go through names and we could probably not finish in the next few minutes, but there was Definite Article, Dance Design, Brief Truce, Market Booster. See those horses in the Moyglare stud colours as well.
Yeah, we'll have a quick word on those.
Yeah.
Definite Article was I bought him as a yearling, and he was always a lovely horse to train. He won the National Stakes, so he was a Group 1 winner as a 2-year-old. And as I hadn't really, I thought, brought him to his full potential, I'd hoped that he could win the Irish Derby for us. And just he was beaten a short head. Nowadays it'd probably be a nose. And it was just one of those races that it was the first time I made the comment. I think I was pretty certain he was beaten, and we went into the second enclosure, and I remember the winner came into the winner's enclosure and he got a huge ovation. I think the result had just been announced in the first, so the winner got all the ovations, and Definite Article had been beaten in nose, came into the second enclosure, and I remember clearly sitting back on the rail that was the periphery rail to the second enclosure, and thinking the words, second is a very lonely place. Because all the adulations went for the winner.
Yeah.
And Definite Article and Mike Kinnan and myself got nothing. And that's the way I felt.
Yeah.
I just looked at it, and I looked at it in the light, in my fullness of life, how everything went to the winner. And the second, as I said, was a lonely place.
Yeah.
Dance Design.
Yeah, Dance Design was a lovely filly to train, very, very tough. Won the Irish Oaks, and she won the Pretty Pollies as well. She was third in the Coronation for me in Royal Ascot. Unlucky not to win the Moyglare as a 2-year-old, but made up for it as a 3-year-old, being a classic winner.
Very good miler. And Brief Truce.
Brief Truce was a special horse for me, good 2-year-old. Ran a good race in the Irish 2000 Guineas, didn't win, but we went for the St. James's Palace Stakes. And that race was built up to be the mile of the decade. That was always reflected. I'll always remember that was, the media called it the mile of the decade. And of course you had some great horses in that race. Rodrigo de Tirano, the Guineas winner. And of course you had the superstar who'd be the champion 2-year-old of the world, the horse from the really good horse, Arazi.
Arazi, yes, of course.
He had Arazi. We had Arazi. And Arazi was expected naturally to win. The English 2000 Guineas and 2000 and Irish 2000 Guineas winner was expected. And we showed up with a 28-to-1 shot called Brief Truce. And he got an inspired ride from Michael Kinnan. And of course we beat the 2 champions. And it was one of those very special days for me to win the St. James's Palace Stakes with an outsider. And beat the 2 highest rated milers of the world.
And just before we move on to the final horse in this era, just mention Market Booster.
Yeah, Market Booster was a lovely filly I trained from Moyglare. She was a good group winner in Ireland. And I went for a race in Munich with her, the Group 1, there the first week of August. And she absolutely excelled. So she was a very, very high class, lovely filly to train, all quality.
Should we get into the star? And a horse that I assume that a lot of people still associate you very closely with, even 30 years after his greatest moment, nearly 30 years, and that, of course, is Vintage Crop. When I say the name Vintage Crop, what's the first thought, emotion that comes to your mind now?
First is what a wonderful horse he was, how much he made, how much he did for me, how much he gave me, how much I owe him, because he fulfilled a lot of my life's ambitions. Having worked, as I said, as a young vet in Australia, and I'd always wanted to bring a horse back to win the Melbourne Cup. And in those days, very few people thought it was possible, practical. In fact, he could have won it the year before, but it wasn't possible. I entered him the year before he won. And that's what drew the attention. But because of the quarantine rules and the flight path of planes, it wasn't possible, in my opinion, for any European horse, or any horse, to run in the Melbourne Cup from outside of Australasia. Mm-hmm. So what, over the coming year, with the help of the Departments of Agriculture in Canberra and in Brussels and in Dublin, we managed to change the flight path of planes, and we managed to change the quarantine location. Location's a key word, because previously horses had to go, that went to Australia, had to quarantine in Sydney in the equine quarantine, where they spent their 2 weeks walking around, and there was no such thing as taking them out or exercising them. So it wasn't possible. So it took me a year of work with the different departments, of governmental departments of Australia, of Brussels and of Ireland, to change all those rules, and with the help of the management, obviously, of the racetrack, to get it done.
You had the small matter of a Cesarewitch en route, just to pay for the airfare.
Yeah, well, just
that happens to be the easiest winner of a Cesarewitch I've ever seen.
Yeah, well, he won 2 Irish St. Leges for us, but the English Cesarewitch was probably my biggest coup, if I could use the word.
Yes, it was well backed, wasn't it?
And yeah, he went off clear favourite on the day, and it was a competitive field, but he made them look very ordinary.
No, Walter Swinburne.
Walter Swinburne.
Yeah. He never had to move on him, did he?
Yeah. Michael Canaan, who was my stable rider all those years, the agreement was he was then riding in Hong Kong for the season. He'd left to ride in Hong Kong, and Walter Swinburne and Julie rode him. And we have a great photograph of the horse with his ears pricked, and Walter just sitting beautifully on him. He literally never came off the bridle.
It's funny, talking to your son earlier, and if you listen to the commentary on YouTube, I can't remember what the conversation was anyway, and then you watch it without a commentary, in the commentary, if you didn't know you have pictures, you think, God, this was an exciting and really close race. You watch it live and you think, no resistance. From 4 out, he's going to win.
He actually never moved on him.
Absolutely bolted up. And so when he got on to win the first one, you tell us about that in a minute, but you had an interesting reception, you were telling me.
In Australia?
Yeah.
Yeah, well then, so we got the rules changed, and we got so that European horses could run in Australia and do their quarantine on another racetrack. We actually quarantined at a very good racetrack, Sandown, and in Australia, in Melbourne. And so he and Drum Taps were the first 2 horses to represent the rest of the world to have a crack at the Melbourne Cup. And Drum Taps and the great Frankie Dettori rode Drum Taps. Yeah. Michael Canaan flew in from Hong Kong to ride Media Puzzle. But naturally, Frankie got the limelight and excelled. And Drum Taps had possibly travelled better than we had, because Vintage Crop, at the back of all his courage, was quite a delicate horse in many ways. And I only really got Vintage Crop right maybe 2 days before the race, because he was a little bit dehydrated, and I was looking at his blood picture every day, and I only really got him the way I wanted to in the last 48 hours before the race. As a result, I couldn't work him. And all your colleagues in the Australian media were extremely disappointed because I never worked the horse. He did one little workout with 2 basically jumpers that were kindly given to me to work with him. But whereas Drum Taps was working exceptionally well, and Frankie was glowing at his comments. Consequently, Drum Taps went off, maybe favourite, second favourite. And Vintage Crop drifted out to, I think it was 28-1 or something like that, because he just got no media attention on the day. And of course, because some of the leading Australian trainers like Bart Cummins, a man who I have the highest regard for, and who became a good friend of mine afterwards, was not very complimentary towards my mission to try and win a Melbourne Cup from the Australians, and was quite critical of my training preparation of the horse. Wow. To bring a horse that hadn't raced for 6 weeks and think he's going to win the Melbourne Cup, you must be joking. In those days, the correct way to do it was to race on the Saturday in the McKinnon. You ran on the Saturday over 10 furlongs, and you ran back in the Melbourne Cup on the Tuesday. And that was the way you won the Melbourne Cup. And this outlier, me, coming from Ireland with a horse that hadn't run for 6 weeks, had shipped halfway around the world, hadn't even worked well, hadn't breathed once, and he thinks he's going to win the Melbourne Cup. No chance. And that was Bart's comments. Yeah. Wow. I mean, you know, and he wasn't the only one. Like, most Australians wrote him off that it couldn't be done.
Am I right that there was a bit of drama about the flight leaving to go to Australia for Vintage Crop?
There was extreme drama with the flight. What happened was, I didn't realise with fog that it's easier to take off in fog than land in fog. Okay. Right. And with all the best planning, for 1 year I planned this. I thought meticulously. And the plane to bring him over to catch up with the Cathay Pacific flight he was on out of Heathrow to Melbourne. He was going on a special plane to bring him across from quarantine point of view. He had done his quarantine time in Ireland. Now he was ready to go. And the flight was to leave from here about, I think it was about 8 o'clock in the evening. So he would, or maybe a little bit earlier, 7 o'clock in the evenings, to join in with, and the problem was, if he missed the connecting flight, there wasn't another one for a week's time. Wow. A cargo flight, there wasn't another one. And that was wrong timing, because he had to do his quarantine in Australia, so it wouldn't have happened. It would have been too late. So he had to go on this flight. And the problem was with fog in Dublin Airport, and very bad fog. And the plane to pick him up got us over as far as Liverpool, Speke Airport in Liverpool, and put down there, and waited there for the fog to clear in Dublin. And then the pilot bravely came over to Dublin. He flew around a couple of times, and he just could not land. And I was getting word back that this was highly unlikely that all this venture was going to happen. I remember walking across my path from my house to my yard, and I really thought, you know, maybe it's just as well, because everybody says this whole venture is mad. And both people in Ireland and everybody in Australia, it's utter madness to think you're going to bring a horse from Ireland that hasn't run for 6 weeks and win the Melbourne Cup. There's a lot of expense involved. There's a lot of time, effort and work. This is all, maybe it's just as well that this stops now and saves all this expense and effort and everything. And I was kind of relaxed and accepting that it wasn't going to happen. And maybe it's all for the best. And as I got to my gate into my yard, my big old mobile phone rang. And it was Michael Dowling, the BBA, to say the pilot had one last effort and he'd found a hole in the fog. That's the words he used. He was just landed in Dublin Airport. Get the horse up straight away and we'll still make it.
Good God.
So the horse went up a record time to Dublin Airport, loaded, straight across, got the Cathay Pacific flight, and the rest is history. But it came that close. And I said about luck and life, if you know what I mean. Yeah. But I actually was relaxed, because I thought maybe all this is just as well. But this whole notion of bringing horses this far around the world, it's too soon, it's too early in the development of transport. Maybe it's all for best. Well, it was for the best.
So we get to Melbourne Cup Day. Dermot, talk me through the experience of the day unfolding, the race unfolding, and everything that came after.
Oh, it was one of those special days of life. And it's, as I said, it's one of the great days of horse racing in the world. And we went into a little bit of fear and, you know, concern, the combination of fear, excitement, confidence, all built up together. I had this confidence because I knew I had got my horse right for the day. And irrespective of what everybody in Australia said, and despite how much Frankie thought he'd win. I knew the combination of Vintage Crop, Michael Canaan, and myself, that we'd be a very hard team to beat. And so it proved. The horse ran a superb race, got a great ride. And we got one of the greatest receptions of all times, because there is a huge Irish population in Australia, and certainly in Melbourne. And I don't think I ever remember, of all my winners down the years, a horse getting a bigger and better reception than he got. There was Irish flags flying everywhere. And for Irish people living in Australia and Melbourne and present there or watching on television, it was a huge occasion. And there were so many stories I could tell you, but one guy came up to me and he had a mortgage on his house, and Vintage Crop was actually 80-1 at one stage to win the race. Like, this gives you an idea. This is the horse that is a classic winner, a handicap. He's won the English Cesar, and he's 80-1, because that gives you the idea. Nobody thought he could win, or this venture was totally mad. And this guy had backed him to clear his mortgage and everything. And the man was ecstatic. And he wrote to me, and I've invited to stay with him in his home the rest, anytime I'm ever there. And there's other guys, like a young guy, he had a hold of my jacket and he wouldn't let me go, because he basically hadn't done well in Australia and he wanted to go home for Christmas after 5 years. And his last chance was to back Vintage Crop. And his last couple of $100 he had on Vintage Crop. Wow. Not only gave him his money to get home, but a few bucks. And to get the guy to let go of my jacket, he just held on to me. But that would give you an idea of the reception. We know about Cheltenham, which is the only one compares, but not even the greatest receptions at Cheltenham can compare with the numbers of people that wanted to get into that winner's enclosure for that first Melbourne Cup winner. Because it was life-changing. It was, I've said, it was the internationalization of horse racing, because we had opened the door for what has happened in the coming years. The way, as I believe, horse racing will continue to become more international. The trip of those two horses, they opened and started off the internet, the Australia, and everything else then followed from then. And of course, I was very fortunate the Lord Mayor presented me with the key to the city of Melbourne, the trophy that I very much admire.
What an experience, yeah.
Yes.
Wow, fantastic.
I imagine that obviously the success as a professional must have been something else, but the pride of doing it for Ireland?
There was great pride in it. I think pride didn't come into my thoughts. What came into my thoughts was satisfaction. And I remember just the horse going by the line, and I was just stood there just in quiet reflection that this was something I'd so much wanted to achieve, and now I'd done it. And words fail. And I just watched, because it was obvious he was going to win. And I just watched silent. And people coming up congratulating me, and I had nothing. It was just satisfaction of all the work from all the people. David Phillips, who looked after the horse, Michael Canaan, my whole team, Mark and Chris, everybody. This was just a special day.
Well, there are very few things that can supersede that. But there were a couple that came along to challenge it. I'm not sure that they would do. And we'll move on from the 90s into the 2000s. And there are a couple of pretty good stayers in this spell as well. And I'll let Steve start with this one. Again, one of your favourites?
Well, yeah, absolutely. You see, I'm sure in his book, Vinnie Rowe thinking, I see your two Irish legends and I'll raise you two. Tell us something about it. I mean, for years as well, like the most reliable, genuine, lovable horse of,
I think
tell us about him.
Well, Pat Smullen always said he was his favourite racehorse.
Yeah, I bet.
And he's got to be right up there for me as well. I bought him as a yearling. He was by definite article. And he was just such a superb, beautiful colt to train for those years. And he was a very sound horse. And he's a good 2-year-old. But I was pretty tough on him. he was the same vintage as Galileo. And Galileo obviously beat him in the classic trials, in the Derby trials. And I actually even sent him down for an Italian Derby. He ran very well, but the ground was very firm. He went by road and came back by road, and ran him in the Irish Derby a few weeks later. And he was so tough and very consistent, operating at Group 1 level all the time. As I said, he won 4 Irish St. Ledgers consecutively. He won a French St. Leger. I think as a 3-year-old, he won the French St. Leger. And then, of course, we also decided we wanted Melbourne for him. And we ran him 3 times in the Melbourne Cup. And he was the one horse that I always believed was unlucky. If we'd had luck and breaks along the way, he deserved to win a Melbourne Cup. And the year he ran second to Macavie Diva, and she was a great race mare. And he was trying to give her, I forget exactly, let's say 2 kilos. And she got a run up the inside. Pat Smullen did everything right on Vinny. And she just got the run of the race up the inside. I always said one of his colleague Australian riders moved out and let him up the inside. If she didn't get the run up the inside rail, there's no way even Macavie Diva would have beaten Vinnie Rowe. And he was, as I said, conceding way to her. Then, of course, in my second Melbourne Cup with Media Puzzle, turning into the Media Puzzle, he was giving £12 in our weights to Vinnie Rowe. And turning for home, those 2 horses turned for home together, just hit the front. And that was one of my most satisfying moments as a racehorse trainer, to see my 2 horses turn for home in front in the Melbourne Cup, not knowing which of them was going to win, but pretty certain. You'll always look back to see the opposition, see what's going well behind. And I saw there was nothing there going well enough to beat either of these 2 horses. And Media Puzzle, of course, beats him. But there again, and that's the great story with Damien Oliver and the movie and everything. But Vinny was given £12, which people forget, to Media Puzzle on that day. So he was a wonderfully tough, consistent horse.
Unlucky or unfortunate in a Gold Cup, certainly ran very well anyway in an Ascot Gold Cup, was over a distance.
He
probably stretched him.
Distance was just too far. He was a 1.6 mile horse.
Yeah.
Was his optimum distance was 1.6 mile. And the Gold Cup, the 2.5 miles, and that year they just went a very good gallop in it, and it just caught him out. He got beat a neck. But you know, he's racing at Group 1 level over different distances all the time.
Well, it's funny, when you're doing the, reminding myself of his form, I'd like to make time, you look at his marks he's run to, just whatever figure you could use, time, form, racing, whatever, they were remarkably consistent. He was, you know, automatic almost. You know, he was just,
he gave you his maximum every time he ran.
So you don't mind horses losing when they're doing their absolute damnedest.
And the interesting thing, he was doing it for me for years.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as I said previously, I was quite hard on him as a 3-year-old. He had a busy campaign.
Yeah.
You know, he'd gone for the Italian Derby. He was a Group 1 winner in France as a 3-year-old.
Yeah.
And then he was to go on the next 4 years to win the Irish St. Leger.
Yeah.
Nearly win the Gold Cup of Royal Ascot.
Absolutely.
Unlucky not to win one of his 3 ventures of a Melbourne Cup. And he was just, and that's why Pat Smullen named him as his favourite horse.
Yeah, perfect, yeah.
Well, you've just mentioned Media Puzzle,
obviously
winning you a second Melbourne Cup. And I imagine for people, for yourself, if you didn't believe in fate, serendipity, call it whatever you want, before that, you probably would have done after that.
Yeah, well, Media Puzzle was obviously a very talented horse. I thought when he ran as a 3-year-old, when he was 4th in the English St. Leger, I remember saying to Mike Dillon in the enclosure in Doncaster, there's my next Melbourne Cup winner. And he was a stayer with speed. And in fact, he looked like winning the English St. Leger. He actually didn't get home. 1.6 miles in Doncaster was just too far from him. But he had the pace. He was a stakes winner over 1.25 miles. And he developed and he came forward. And then we had little problems keeping him sound. And he hadn't, I believed he could win a Melbourne Cup, but he wasn't going to get into the race. So we sent him down beforehand to get him qualified. It was risk, another risk you take in life. But I had convinced Michael Smurfett with Vintage Crop that it was a risk worth taking, and he had supported me. And I convinced him again with Media Puzzle that this is a risk I believe. This horse is only coming to the fore now. He's very well handicapped. And I don't know whether he can beat Vinnie Rowe, but again, we would look at the prize money and see the cost, that it was a chance worth taking, because I reckon he'd finish in the first 5. So my son Mark went down with him, and he won the Geelong Cup to qualify. And Damien Oliver, the champion jockey at the time in Australia, duly rode him and gave him a very polished, a very confident ride to win the Geelong Cup. And then he was into the Cup proper. But then, of course, disaster struck, because Damien's brother was sadly killed in a barrier trial the next week. And the big question was whether Damien would ride in the race or not. He was booked to ride. He was thrilled to ride the favourite, which was Media Puzzle. But now with this tragedy, would he ride or not? And he'd indicated he wouldn't decide till very, very close to the race, and it was pretty well unlikely that he would ride. So when I stepped off the plane in Melbourne, all the media wanted to know, not about the horse, but who's going to ride the favourite for the Cup in Media Puzzle. And I just said what I believed, that I would give Damien as much time as possible for him to decide and to reflect upon everything, and extended my sympathies on the air to him, but not to rush into a decision. And they said, what English jockey? Will it be an Irish jockey, an English jockey? Will it be a local jockey? Who's going to ride the horse? And they kept insisting it was going to be, Damien's not going to ride. You better know, he said, was that he hasn't told me he's not going to ride the horse. Well, we know he's not going to ride it. Well, said, you know more than I know. He has not told me he's not going to ride the horse, and I'm prepared to wait on the man. And I headed off to get a taxi to my hotel. And Damien had watched that interview, fortunately, with the media. And he straight away decided he was going to ride the horse. Wow. And especially when some of the media said he had decided he wasn't going to ride. He decided that because I had expressed my sympathy, and rightly so, and because I was prepared to wait for the man. And of course, Damien rode the horse, won the race, and of course the movie went from there, where Brendan Gleeson plays me. I think the movie worked out quite good as well. I was pleased.
You happy with Brendan Gleeson's performance?
Very happy, very happy. Oh no, Brendan came down here and he spent a week with us, and not only is he a brilliant actor, but he's a lovely person.
Can I ask what the emotion would have been like on that day? I've seen the film and obviously watched the race from afar. I can only imagine what it must have been like on that day to be at Melbourne.
It was great to win. There was mixed emotions, to be quite honest with you. And I felt very much for the owners, Jim Sheridan of Vinnie Rowe, because so much that horse had done, if you know what I mean. And I always felt he deserved to win a Melbourne Cup, and here we'd beaten him with Media Puzzle. And so thrilled for the owners of Media Puzzle and for everything we had achieved, and for Damien. But I would have loved Pat Smullen and Jim Sheridan and Mike Watt, who'd bought into the horse. It was a great character, as you know. Mike had bought into the horse, and Mike wanted so much to win a Melbourne Cup, still does. And I remember driving out with him, and he was showing me places, you know what I mean, I remember Ned Kelly's goal where he was imprisoned. And there was so much history that Mike really wanted to win a Melbourne Cup. For Jim Sheridan, who is, as you know, a great film producer, and won his Academy Awards and things like that. I would have loved for them. I would have loved for the horse to dead heat with Media Puzzle. Yeah. That's what I really wanted.
Racing! An almighty roar from the crowd. Freemason, Miss Melissa going back. Requiem began nicely. County Tyrone was fast away. Dardia Poor began quickly. Thong Classic. Hatharana going forward with Sand Mason and Requiem on the outside. Beekeeper a little wide. They're linking up with the course proper. Sorting themselves out. Victory Smile just in front of Dardia Poor. Media Puzzle straight into a lovely trailing position. He is running third, just one off the rails. Cyclades is over on the inside. Sand Mason going up about 4 horses deep to take them on. Requiem is next, then Hatharana, County Tyrone. Pugin going to 6th on the outside. Frankie Dettori is jumping onto the heels of Hatharana. His stablemate is following forward. Next on the inside is Pentastic. Distinctly Secret, Mr. Prudent, followed by Thong Classic and Miss Melissa. Hales getting back in the field. Getting well back to Jardine's Lookout, then Rain Gauge, and Freemason drops to the rear. The big field thunders to the turn out of the straight in the Melbourne Cup. 2,200 metres left to go. Sand Mason takes up the running. Sand Mason leading by a length. Hatharana going to second. Frankie's caught a little wide on Pugin. He's still out 3 horses deep. He's going to third on the outside of Dardia Poor. 5th in the centre there is Requiem. Helene Vitality having a wide run. County Tyrone in the middle. Cyclades is next on the rails. Then Victory Smile. Vinnie Rose getting up into a nice trailing position. He is 2 off the fence, but he's getting cover there. Pentastic is next on the inside of Media Puzzle. Media Puzzle is right behind Vinnie. A length and a half then to Beekeeper, followed by Mr. Prudent on the inside. Distinctly Secret's out a little bit deep as well. Miss Melissa's a fair way back in the field. She's racing on the outside of Grey Song. Further back then came Hale, Rain Gauge, and Freemason is still at the rear. Out past the 1400, and Sand Mason shows the way. Sand Mason taken on now by Hatharana. Hatharana surging to the front to lead by 3/4 of a length on Sand Mason. Pugin is now dropping into a beautiful trailing position. He's 2 lengths away in third spot, followed then by Helene Vitality getting a nice run, and Vinnie Rowe is right on the heels of Pugin. He's starting to follow forward behind him. Dardia Poor is on the inside. Media Puzzle just seemed to lose his position a little bit. He's back behind Cyclades. Beekeeper coming to the outside. Victory Smile and Pentastic. Distinctly Secret has never been on the track. He's going wide, and so is Jardine's Lookout. They're approaching the home turn. 600 metres left to go in the Melbourne Cup. They're on the bend now. Hatharana's just in front. Vinnie Rose making a dash, and so is Media Puzzle. Here comes Damien on Media Puzzle. Vinnie Rowe and Media Puzzle. Beekeeper to the outside, putting in a great run. Distinctly Secret is next, followed then by Pentastic. Media Puzzle. Media Puzzle. Damien takes him to the lead with 200 metres to go, and he's shot away. Media Puzzle 3 lengths in front. This is the one that Damien's wanted. This is the one that he's riding for Jason, and Media Puzzle goes to the line to win the Melbourne Cup. Damien stands high in the irons, salutes the heavens. That's for Jason. It's Media Puzzle, the winner.
You said you were close with Media Puzzle, close-ish in the Ledger, and
Yes.
the British Classic. You didn't have to wait too long for a British Classic with Refused to Bend in the 2,000 guineas, and up to that stage he was continuing an unbeaten run. Again, maybe you can reflect on him a bit.
Yeah, well, we won our first Classic when Blue Wind won the Epsom Oaks, and Refused to Bend was a good 2-year-old. He was a lazy colt, and he was never impressive in his homework, but he was tough, and he won his maiden at Gorham Park as a 2-year-old. Then he went and won the National Stakes, so he became a Group 1 winning 2-year-old. And he was tough, solid horse. That's the best way to describe him. And he was an ideal horse in many ways. He went on firm ground. He was a miler, and he was ideal for the English 2,000 guineas. And once again, he got an exceptional ride from Pat Smullen. Tough, good horse, always in the van, always well positioned in the race, quickened up while and won the guineas.
I always thought his name was so apt for the way he raced.
Yeah.
Very true, very true. Refused to bend, and that's exactly what he was. And as I said, he went on to win for his other group races, and then he was sold to Sheikh Mohammed.
An Irish Derby winner is also in this era, and a very, very good horse. I think a horse that you held in high regard very early on in his career, Grey Swallow.
Ah, yes, indeed. Now we're getting some real horses. And Grey Swallow was another very genuine, beautifully made horse. And he I ran him in Galway and he won by 12 lengths. And the 2-year-old maiden, Brendan Sheridan was the judge. I remember Brendan saying to me he'd never seen a horse come up the hill of Galway from the turn into the straight to the line, and it's a steep hill. He'd never seen any horse come up the hill so quick. And he went on, he was unbeaten. He went on to be champion 2-year-old of Ireland. And then, of course, as a 3-year-old, he was placed in the English and the Irish Guineas, but it was over 1.5 miles was his forte. And he gave me one of my special days because my mother bred him. I was part owner of him. And to win the Irish Derby was very, very special for us all. As a 4-year-old, he won the Tattersalls Gold Cup. I brought him to America and he won in California for me. And then he was second in the Manhattan, I think it was, back in Belmont. And we sold him to Australia as a stallion.
Didn't he beat North Lights, the English Derby, when he won the Irish Derby?
Yeah, when he won the Irish Derby, the first, second, third and fourth from Epsom came to the Curragh that year.
Yeah.
So it was a fair performance by him.
It was. Yeah.
Speaking of America, again, there was a spell, there was a spell during the 2000s where you won the American Derby countless times. I think 5 in total, but it seemed to...
It was a race that I thought I wanted to win, and it was, in those days, it was quite easy to get to a lovely racetrack, Arlington Park, which sadly is no more, but it was one of my favourite racetracks of America for many reasons. I always thought there was, especially the turf track, there was always a little ease in the ground. It was never really firm. And I always thought because of its proximity to the lake. But anyway, Arlington was a very nice racetrack, and this race suited. It came at a good time of year. And I won it with a couple of nice horses. But I won it with a horse called Pine Dance. And he was like Go and Go, only a lower grade. And we decided after he won the American Derby that, as I said, he was a good, tough colt. I wanted to run him on the dirt because I had interest in him to sell him to Saudi Arabia as a stallion. But the people buying him wanted to see him run on the dirt. So I decided we'd go for the Pennsylvania Derby with him, which was run in Philadelphia. And that was on the dirt. And it was, nowadays it's $1 million race. It was a $500,000 race in those days. So he shipped from Arlington, Chicago to Pennsylvania. And Julie won the Pennsylvanian Derby. And so it was not often that you get a horse go and win it. Having won 3 weeks earlier on the turf, wins another Grade 1 on the dirt. So he was special.
A filly of the same era, if you don't mind mentioning. Again, pretty good one as well, Dressed to Thrill.
Dressed to Thrill was a very, very good filly. She was a good 2-year-old. And that spring we had a wet spring and she just didn't come forward. And I probably learned a lot about Dressed to Thrill and patience because I didn't run her till she came right. And she didn't come right till the middle of summer. And I didn't run her. And
sorry, you interrupt. Laymen at home who don't train.
No.
What you often hear trainers talk about until they come. What would you mean by that exactly?
It was a cold spring and she hadn't come over her coat.
Right.
And she just wasn't working well. And she just hadn't come over her coat. Her work performance at home wasn't what I was expecting. We missed the Irish 1000, the English 1000 guineas. We missed the Irish 1000 guineas. She was perfectly sound, but I just wasn't happy with the filly. And I was so fortunate that Walter Hafner owned the filly. And he said, Dermot, just wait till you're happy. Wait till you're satisfied to this filly. So we waited and we didn't run her, I think, till about July. And of course she was unbeaten and the wonderful thing, some of the races were Group 2s, that are now Group 1s, like the Matron. And she was a major group winner in Ireland, England, and of course she wound up winning the Matriarch for me. She also won in England.
Sun Chariot?
The Sun Chariot, yeah. She won the Matron in Ireland, she won the Sun Chariot, and then she won the Matriarch. The Matriarch that year was a very tough race because the 2 highest rated turf fillies of America were in the race, ridden by the 2 best riders of California at the time. And Pat Smullen, we have a great photograph of her winning. She won a neck and a neck, winning the Matriarch. But she was a special filly. and they suited each other, Pat and Dress to Thrill.
Lovely.
Can I just pick up on what Steve was sort of talking about? Because I would say, and I'm sure Steve would agree, that one word that would be attributed to the way you seemingly train your horses is with patience. And that priority of waiting till the horse comes right. Is that the case across the board? Have you ever tried to push a horse, or is it you do that with every horse?
No, I've tried and failed.
Right.
I've tried and I failed. So you learn very quickly by your mistakes. This is the great thing about training racehorses. You learn every day. It's why I do it. It's why I enjoy it so much. Is there's something new every day to be learned, and you won't always get it right.
Was there the American Oaks, or what was it?
Dimitrova, yeah.
Another horse, if you don't mind.
Yeah, Dimitrova was a good 2-year-old, and she developed well over the winter, and she was a filly that I certainly maximised. And we started off, I think, in March winning a maiden, and then we ran her at stakes level and she won. Then I went for the Irish 1000 guineas. She ran third, but she was a good, tough filly. And then I got the idea that we'd start campaigning. She was just off the top. She was Group 1 place, and that's what she was. And that was her maximum. Group 1 filly, Group 1 place, classic placed, but I wanted more. And the Hollywood Oaks was worth $750,000 in those days, and a Grade 1. And that's where we decided that we'd go with her. And she shipped to California, and of course she came out and won the Hollywood Oaks. And that was in, correct me if I'm wrong, that was kind of the end of June or early July. And we flew her back to Ireland, gave her 2 weeks off, and then I decided I wanted to bring her back to America again, and I wanted to go to the East Coast this time. I wanted to go for the Flower Bowl. But on the way, there's another Grade 1 in those days. I think it's the New York Stakes for fillies. So she ran in that and ran second, and then she went on for the Flower Bowl about 10 days later, in September now, and she won the Flower Bowl. And then we shipped her back. We didn't bring her back to Ireland again, but we shipped her on to California with the Breeders' Cup, and she ran the Breeders' Cup Fillies and Mares, and that was her last race for me. She didn't win the Fillies and Mares, but she'd won the Flower Bowl, and she won so she won, as a 3-year-old, she had won a Grade 1 level, both on the west coast of the United States. She'd come back to Ireland, had a break, went back to the east coast of the United States, and won her second Grade 1, the Flower Bowl. She was a lovely, genuine, tough filly.
And they're off. So the field leave the stalls for the Investig Derby of 2016. Port Douglas is hurried up to the lead, with Deauville also racing handily, and also moving forward in the early stages, Shogun. Ulysses up towards the inside as well as they make their way through the first furlong, with Port Douglas just taking them along. Towards the outside of the field, both Cloth of Stars racing in a handy position, in company as well with Massart, who's racing a little keenly as Port Douglas now crosses over and makes his way towards the running rail. In fourth place is Shogun, just ahead of Moonlight Music, who's towards the inside at the moment. Moonlight Magic sitting in about fifth place. As settling just behind those, we have Idaho. Ulysses drops into about midfield with Harzand at the moment, and also across the Stars. US Army Ranger is given time towards the rear of the field in company with Wings of Desire, and having jumped from the outside stall, Red Verdon has been given time as well, crossing right behind the field, along with Humphrey Bogart is at the rear of the field. So out in front and at a reasonable gallop, it is Port Douglas who tows the Derby field up the hill and continues the climb. From in second place, the Godolphin Blue Jacket of Cloth of Stars. Third for Moonlight Magic, racing on the inside of Massart, with in fifth place the free-sweating Idaho on the outside of Shogun, and then across the Stars. Harzand midfield in company with Ulysses, then Biodynamic, who's just ahead of Deauville. Wings of Desire in those maroon colours. US Army Ranger, the all dark blue, has Humphrey Bogart and Red Verdon behind, as now the field begin that trademark descent towards Tattenham Corner, and there is no hanging about for Port Douglas out in front. He has gone 5 or 6 lengths clear. In second place, Cloth of Stars. Massart, Biodynamic, moves up on the outside. Then behind these we have Idaho, just pushed along to give chase is Moonlight Magic. At this stage across the Stars with Harzand, Algometer comes next with Wings of Desire. US US Army Ranger still in no hurry, and right at the back of the field is Red Burden. Port Douglas leads the turn for home, but the pack are right at his heels. Cloth of Stars poised to have first crack, then Massart. Pulling out is Idaho. Harzan comes next. Pull towards the outside, Wings of Desire, US Army Ranger. Red Burden getting a nice seam right up the inside rail. Port Douglas is taken on by Cloth of Stars. Now joining in down the outside is Idaho. Harzan comes next. Red Burden ran out of room on the inside. Right down the outside, Wings of Desire and US Army Ranger. Idaho Strike Cab and Harzan are the first to go for home. US Army Ranger is now in full cry towards the outside. They enter the final furlong. Harzan, US Army Ranger, has got to the leader's girth, but has still got to get by as Harzan is pulling out more. And it's Harzan in the colours of the Aga Khan who has won the Investig Derby for Pat Smullen and Dermot Weld.
Dermot, we'll move into 2010 onwards, and again, the hits keep on coming. And a couple of major races in Britain that I think meant a lot to you, seemingly.
Sure.
And I'll start with the one that certainly means a lot to the sport of horse racing in general, and that's the Derby at Epsom. I believe, if I remember rightly from some of the articles I've read, that when you won the Oaks with Blue Wind, it was 81, you mentioned or you thought about winning the Derby, hopefully sooner rather than later. What was it like to finally get it?
When Harzan came along, he was the ideal horse, and he had developed well over the winter. Of course, he'd gone to Leopardstown. He's won his group race impressively. And look, I've been very fortunate around the world and winning these Group 1 races on 4 continents. We've talked about Hong Kong, we've talked about East Coast, West Coast, Midwest of the United States. We've talked about Australia, up and down Europe. But I'd never won the Derby. And yes, I had won a lot of classics in Ireland, France, England, Oaks, 2,000 guineas. But I'd always wanted to win. The Epsom Derby was always the race I wanted to win. That was always just the race I wanted. And here I had the horse, hopefully, to do it. So that's how important to win the Epsom Derby was to me, because I believe our system, our pattern system is excellent, but classics are the supreme. They are the supreme test of a horse. And as you know, I love training a horse that can go 1.5 miles, and I think the Epsom Derby is the pinnacle.
It's reassuring to hear that in modern day times, because all traditions continuously get a little bit eroded as we go through time. So it's
well, times will come and go, and sprinters will come and go, but it's the classics that will remain. And you look at the pedigrees and look at how the classics continually come to the fore. And you look, in my opinion, we've gone far too much into, people will disagree with me, into what I call cheap speed. And look how successful Japanese breeding and racing is. They have successfully bought so many staying Derby winners. And they are the bedrock. Japanese breeding has come from, in my opinion, a very low ebb to the very top. A lot of that is being attributed buying the right staying stallions. And like, if you look at America, most of the races are over 1 mile, 1.1 miles. They're not over 5 furlongs. And actually, unless you have a Group 1 sprinter, they're quite hard to sell. But everybody wants instant success, and people are not prepared to wait. But now with the Australian demand for horses, it's certainly helping dramatically to encourage people to breed horses that can still run 1.5 miles.
You said that you sort of knew that Harazan was the right type, the right horse. What were his qualities?
Lovely made horse, very balanced. I think that's the key word. The answer to your question was he was very balanced, and he was a stayer with speed, and he had guts and courage.
Yeah.
And the morning of the race, of course, he spread a plate, and that causes havoc.
Yeah.
And he stepped off the box when he got to Epsom, and he was lame. And we were very fortunate in that I got great help from Jim Bulger's farrier, and everybody was very, very helpful. Pat Keating, Aiden's Charlie Head lad was extremely helpful. And we got that horse, and we went through a couple of agonizing hours, and we got him right. And I notified the stewards immediately, and the media, and everybody knew exactly that the horse has spread a plate and he's going to be reshod. when we're happy he's sound. And it's going to be 50-50 whether he's going to run or not. It's as simple as that. So the stewards gave me sufficient time, and we replated the horse. And Jim Riley was the farrier that plated him, and he trotted out sound as a bell. But I did say to Pat Smullen, when you're on your way down to the start, if you're not happy, Pat, at the start, withdraw him. And he'd come into third favourite, I think. But we were happy that the horse was perfectly sound going to the race. And the proof of the pudding was in the eating. And he put up the usual tough, genuine performance. I was never going to get beat over the last furlong.
Similar story in the Irish Derby, really, wasn't it?
It was a similar in the Irish Derby. He came home, and to be fair to him, he had to go on antibiotics for about a week, and that was a concern. But as I said, we got him right. He had this great constitution in that he helped you, and most magnificent tempered horse. And as I said, very balanced, very tough, and a stare with speed. And it was lovely then to come back on home soil to win the Irish Derby, and for Pat again.
You said the English Derby was the race that you were very keen on winning. Pretty sure, again, you're on record beforehand of saying the Gold Cup was a race, the Ascot Gold Cup was a race you'd like to win. And you've been, you've gone close before, but you won that in 2010.
Royal Ascot has always been very fortunate for me. I've trained 19 group winners at Royal Ascot, and yes, we'd won the Coronation and won the James's Palace, won some of the two-year-old races. And I suppose the one race, I won the Henry VII, the one race I wanted to win was the Gold Cup, because I've been very fortunate in training stayers. And we got very close with Vintage Crop, who really didn't get that trip, or Vinnie Rowe, who didn't get the trip either. Both finished second. And yeah, this was my chance to win the Gold Cup. And competition is so keen nowadays. I'm a realist, that when you get opportunities, you have to take them. And this was our opportunity. And it was a very, very good Gold Cup on very firm ground. And they set a track record. And it was a wonderful finish between Pat Smullen and Johnny Murtha. Johnny was riding the Aidan O'Brien colt. And Pat, of course, was riding for us. And those two horses, two very brave horses, fought out the finish of that Gold Cup. I was delighted for Dr. Lamb, and it was a very special day. Very special.
There's some other very good horses in this spell as well, and we're narrowing down the list to keep it to time. I'll mention a horse that I particularly admired, was Free Eagle, who I think was very, very highly regarded at 2, but there was a bit of a gap between his 2-year-old career ending and his 3-year-old career resuming.
Unfortunately, he was a very good 2-year-old, and unfortunately he got a stress fracture of his tibia. And it was only a stress fracture, I say only, but it meant literally it was the whole start of his career, whether he's going to run the Guineas, the Derby, and everything was lost. So time wasn't on our side. He came out then and he won at Leopardstown at the Champions Weekend. And he actually went on for the English Champions Weekend. I think the ground was too soft. And he ran second. But that was a 4-year-old he excelled. And I think it was one of our finest hours when he won the Prince of Wales.
Yep.
And again, Grey Gatsby was a very good horse at the time that he beat. And another very positive ride from Pat Smullen. But he was a nice horse and a good horse, and a horse I really enjoyed training.
I remember the Irish Champion Stakes, because I felt that he was a little bit unlucky in the way the race panned out, because Golden Horn did that big jink, and the horse that suffered most was Free Eagle.
Yeah, I think in hindsight, there's no doubt he was very unlucky not to win and in the jink that Golden Horn did, it certainly, in my opinion as well, cost us the race, I've no doubt. But we actually finished third because the wonderful mare Found was second. Yeah. And there was a neck and a neck. I've no doubt that had we been second, we would have got the race. That's definitely my opinion.
the list in this era, I mean, it's too many, but just to read a few, but Chinese White, Emulous, Search for a Song we have to talk about, Beth Ra, well, there's a few, but Search for a Song I think deserves an honourable mention.
Ah, she does indeed. She's been a wonderful filly. We still have her, of course. Yeah. She's now a 6-year-old. She's won more race. And she is a filly that loves being a racehorse. And that's why we've kept her in training. She actually loves being a racehorse. She's highly strung. She has her moments. She has a set pattern of life that she likes. But of course, she won the Irish St. Leger very impressively, came back the following year and won it again. And she's just been a very high-class performer. She won the Long Distance Cup. And she's so much black type to her that I'm very, very proud of her. And she'll have one more run at Group 1 level before she retires. But she's been a challenge to train. She is claustrophobic and has remained claustrophobic. But she's got confidence now, I would say, more as the years go on. But she's a very set pattern where she likes to train early in the morning and she goes out with her companion in a paddock for a few hours every morning after her workout, comes in and back into her stable. She's got a companion and lies down for the afternoon. And she just enjoys being a racehorse.
There you go.
And we've enjoyed immensely training her.
A horse that you trained to win the Champion Stakes on Champions Day, Fascinating Rock. And I remember the race in particular. I thought wonderful ride, wonderful performance from the horse, obviously, but the whole combination, because it was a very good Champion Stakes.
Yes.
And I thought on that particular day, he looked extremely good, beyond an average Champion Stakes.
Yeah, it was a really high-class Champions Day. Found was at her absolute pinnacle. Her next race, I think she won the Breeders' Cup. But she was a very good raceman. To beat Found was a very good performance. He was a big horse that took time to develop into his frame. And we just gave him the patience. And his wonderful owner, Maurice Regan, said, take your time with him, and this is the important thing. And so we took our time with him. And he was a good 3-year-old, but he only came into his own as a 4-year-old. He won the Tattersalls Gold Cup here from the Curragh. It was a good renewal of the race. And he developed as the year went on. He loved the knees in the ground, but we had him at his peak. We made probably the right call not running him in the Irish Champion Stakes. We went for the English Champion Stakes with him, despite the fact that it was an excellent renewal of the English Champion Stakes. And they were a good combination, Pat Smullen and himself. And on the day, they were very, very hard to beat.
Zukova?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the next one I've got to.
Yeah, Zukova, again, is a filly that my mother and I bred. And she was a very, very high-class filly. Again, she was a late maturing filly. We took our time with her, and it repaid us in dividends. I think she beat Found here at the Curragh in one of our group races. And I went back to Belmont Park with her for the Man of War. And she absolutely bolted up in the Man of War. And very high-class filly.
Tanawa?
Well, I was just about to say, high-class fillies
This is
as
again
they come.
Absolutely brilliant filly.
Tanawa, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on how she blossomed through that 3-year-old season and won the races at the end of the season that she did. Because watching her in the early part of she's got talent, she's got ability, but I didn't expect to see what was coming.
Yeah, well, once again, she's a filly that developed and was crying out for time, and we gave it to her. But she had a tough enough season as a 3-year-old. And because it started in March, she won her maiden, she won at group level, she won at listed level, group level. And she didn't come down the hill at Epsom and the Epsom Oaks. And that's when I decided to give her a little bit of a break. And this filly just hasn't come yet. And I said, we just got to wait on her and let her fill into her frame, let her develop both mentally and physically. And she went for a summer holiday, and she came back just a much stronger filly. But I will totally agree, at Group 3 level. And after she had a very good, as we said, 3-year-old career. She's a Group 3 winner twice. She won the Blue Wind. But, she won the Blue Wind by a neck. She won a couple of Group 3s as a 3-year-old, which was excellent. But I successfully convinced His Highness and Pat Downs that I wanted to train her for another year because we hadn't seen the best of her. I thought there's a lot of physical and mental development in this filly. And she certainly comes into her own the second part of the year. And we'll maybe forget about the first part of the year, give her time and train her for a major campaign as a 4-year-old. As they say, the rest is history.
Oh, but she just got better and better and better. Then she ended, well, obviously second.
She won the 3 Grade 1s or the
Yeah.
2 Group 1s. She won the Vermeer for us,
Yeah.
put up a spectacular performance. And then she went on Arc Day, of course, and she won the Prix de l'Opera. So she won the Vermeer over 1.5 miles. And she came back and won the Prix de l'Opera. And then, of course, we decided to go for the Breeders' Cup Turf with her. And that was a great day. Unfortunately, I wasn't there. My son Mark was there, but it was a very special day.
Just going into her final career as a racehorse, Tanawa, because I think you made no secret of the fact that you wanted to have a proper go at the Arc, proper preparation for the Arc. I thought things were progressing nicely, albeit a slight bump in the road, not literally, sort of figuratively, when and once again the Irish Champion Stakes didn't quite work out exactly as you'd have wanted.
Well, she came back and she won her group race nicely at Leopardstown. She won about 6 lengths. And then the Irish Champion was the prep for the Arc, or that was it, to win. And be very blunt about it, I think she should have got that in the stewards' room. We did not object. But I think Sir Mark Basilica did her no favours. She was carried halfway across the track. And I think it was I just feel strongly about what happened that day. And I think she should have got the race, because you watch the steward's camera from behind, and it's the best of all. Yes, the head-on, it's pretty explicit, but the camera behind shows the distance that she was carried across the track. In fact, the photographers had to move their position because it looked like the pair of them were going to be off. They were actually had gone off the flat track and they were on the chase track. Interesting, this year, there's an outside rail, but that can't happen anymore. They've got to stay between the rails. I'm convinced if that outside rail had been there, there is no doubt Tarnawa would have got the race, because she'd have been up against the rail. She'd have been pinned up against the rail. It just wouldn't be a question. But there was no outside rail, and that enabled Ryan Moore to continue the drift right across to, as I said, one of the photographers stumbled. You see him stumbling as he tries to get out of the way. Like they have come onto the chase track. But that was her prep race for the Arc. And I had her at her all-time peak for the Arc. And I was very confident. She was a very adaptable, wonderful mare. Twice the equally highest rated filly in the world. And we went into the Arc with confidence. There was a lot of rain that week, and I knew the ground was going to be soft. But she's so adaptable. She'd won on nearly firm ground, the Breeders' Cup, but she could adapt to a slow surface as well. And that morning, the rain in Paris was extreme. And I actually rang forward to know, was racing actually going to take, was racing definitely on, or will it be postponed for a day? And racing obviously went ahead, and the ground was seriously soft. So much so, I always said, never let anybody say that it gets soft in Ireland, because what we raced on that day was just about raceable. It was safe, I have to agree with that. But it was the 5th race on the programme, and there were a number of races run around that track before the Arc. And I think that costed the race more than anything. Now, we were unlucky. For her, she was drawn very low. I think she was drawn 3. And we would have loved an outside draw, because all her wins, the Breeders' Cup, as you know, she comes with that long run down the outside. Or when she won the Vermeer, she comes with the outside. And even any of her races, the Prix de l'Opera, although it was only 10 furlongs, Sumian brings her with a lovely run down the outside. So drawing the inside was not what we wanted. But worse than the draw was the fact that it was getting very chopped up on the inside. And that is what cost her the arc. Because she's so brave, she changed her style, her action, to accommodate the ground. And the winner, full marks to the winner. He was on the day the best horse. And he came down with a wet sail down the outside. He loved the heavy ground. He got everything worked for him. Whereas she had very little room to maneuver on the inside of the arc. Very little room. She was ridden very tight. But she was a lioness. And she would fight and battle for you all day long. And you know, she gets beat half a length for last year's Arc de Triomphe. And I'm quite convinced if she got any bit of room or any bit of decent ground, she'd have won the Arc.
Would that be one of the most, I wouldn't say disappointing because she's run brilliantly, one of the most painful?
Yeah, it probably was. It goes back to Definite Arctic have been beaten the shortest head for the Irish Derby, where the second is a lonely place. And that's what it was. You know, all the adulation is about the Arc winner. You know, you're beaten that much for the Arc. And in my opinion, just fortune, or just this time, didn't help us. And we would have won. So second can be a very lonely place.
Now, 99% of this probably is reflective, obviously, but it'd be remiss of us while we're here not to at least mention a horse, Tanara's half-sister, whose best days, hopefully, touch wood, are ahead of her. And that's called Tahia.
Yeah, she's a very interesting filly. She's always shown us talent from the very beginning. And she's a filly that just got better in her training. We went for the Fillies Maiden in Galway, and it was nice ground. Why I went there again is because we'd had a very firm, very dry summer, and the ground was always nice in Galway, and just a little ease in the ground for her first start. I thought it'd be very suitable. I thought she put up she won 5.5 lengths. She beat a nice filly of Aidan O'Brien's, a Galileo filly that day. And the big question was whether to go from that into Group 1 level or whether to go for a listed fillies race, which I normally would do. It's highly unusual for me to bring a filly from a maiden company win to go straight into Group 1. So for us to do that, very, very rare, gives you an idea of the high calibre and how we rate the filly.
What does she have to show you or to convince you that she's ready for a Group 1?
Well, she worked with 3-year-old fillies, and she was far superior to the 3-year-old fillies. I think, like, you wouldn't work with a 2-year-old because I've no 2-year-old that could work with her. So she would work with 3-year-old fillies at level weights and be far superior to them. And hence the reason that I knew. And mentally, she's very, very good. Mentally, she was taking her work extremely well. She's a great feeder. She enjoys life. There's character to her. And very professional filly.
You've had some super fillies. Projecting forward, do you think this might be mentioned in the same breath in time?
Yeah, she will. Definitely. There's no doubt about it. She already is, and she will continue to be, hopefully.
Superb.
Well, at least it suggests that there's many more, fingers crossed, good days to come with the racehorses. It would be remiss of us not to mention some of the riders that have contributed to your success, and two in particular that I think are most closely associated with you. Mick Kinnan, first of all. You know, very often in the chat that we've just had here, you said got a very good ride.
Very good ride for Mick. Very good ride for Mick. That was yeah.
Well, I'm a team player. I believe in it's not all about one person. I'm a firm believer. It's the team. It's my 2 sons, Mark and Chris. It's me, all my staff down through the years, and my jockeys. And I've been fortunate. Chris said to me, "Dad, you know, you've been spoiled for 30 years because you've had Mick Kinnan for half that time and Pat Smullen for the other half." And it's a good comment and an accurate one. But both of them were not leading riders when they came to me. And both of them developed to be outstanding riders riding here. And both had slightly different talents and personalities, and both were brilliant. And what I would always say about both of them, they would have been highly successful in any walk of life. not because they happened to be jockeys, but I assure you, with their intelligence, with their work rate, with their enthusiasm, and everything that makes a successful person, both Michael Kinnan and Pat Smullen had that in spades.
What a great ending. You couldn't say nice things.
Oh, beautiful.
It's the truth.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely.
It's all you can do.
Let's mention the film Against the Odds. When that came about, what was that feeling
film.
like?
Yeah, my first, when I heard about it first, I suppose I was a little bit cautious, would be the right word to use. But as time goes by, and as time went on, I really enjoyed it. And I was fortunate to have Brendan Gleeson playing my part. And he came down, as I said, and spent a week here and really got to know the place. And then, of course, he went to Australia and made the movie. And I'm satisfied with the movie. They take a little bit of leeway in a few places. Naturally, that's a movie. But it had good exposure in Australia and Australasia, and wound up being played for a long time on Cathay Pacific Airlines because friends of mine would call and say, we're tired watching you in the cup all the time, you know what I mean? Can they not get some, exaggerating, can they not get some other movie to play besides the cup all the time? We go to sleep on the plane. We know we're watching you all the time. So yeah, it was very enjoyable, and in hindsight, it was an honour to have the whole reference in the movie.
Yeah. So that's the film, The Cup. But you wrote the book Against the Odds, and you wrote that yourself.
Yeah.
There was no help. Which,
No.
I mean, how much did you enjoy doing that?
Yeah, that was a challenge to write my first book and to get it published, and that was a big challenge. And I'm very quiet about it. Very few people knew I was doing it, and as I said, to come up with so Vintage Crop Against All Odds was published. And it got to be number 5 in the non-fiction hardback in Ireland. And I was very proud of that. It wasn't just in the sports section, but to get a book that you'd written yourself. So that gave me great pleasure, enjoyment, confidence, and might even try another book shortly.
Just to close things off, Dermot, and I remember the question now that I asked you about how you felt when Vintage Crop won the Melbourne Cup, and the word you used was satisfaction. When you look at Dermot Weld growing up, Dermot Weld as a teenager, Dermot Weld studying, learning the ropes, and Dermot Weld that's sitting in that chair today, would satisfaction be the word to describe?
I think so. I think so. Definitely. A very satisfied life, very fortunate with family, very fortunate with health. And very, very, as I said, satisfied, and that we've done our best, that I've worked very hard, proud of my achievements.
Dermot Weld, thank you so much for having us. It's been an absolute joy, pleasure, privilege, all the adjectives that you could possibly think of. But from two racing fans, it's also just a lot of fun hearing you talk about those great horses.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Subscribe to Racing TV's YouTube channel now to watch more great races like this.